Ethan stood in the middle of the burning field with the sound of swords and cries around him. The war had gone on for so long that many men had forgotten what peace felt like. He fought not for glory, but because his home demanded it. His hands were steady on the sword, but his heart felt heavy with the sight of bodies that lay still on the ground. He pushed forward through the smoke and broken walls, not knowing what he was about to find. In the ruins of a small stone house, Ethan heard a faint sound. It was not the voice of a soldier or the cry of a fighter. It was softer, weaker. He pushed aside the broken wood and saw a young girl, no older than 10. She was trapped under a beam, her face streaked with dust and tears. She looked up at him with fear, knowing he wore the armor of her enemies. For a moment they stared at each other, soldier and child, two lives meant to be divided by war. Ethan lowered his sword and set it aside. He pulled at the beam until his arms shook. Finally it rolled off and he lifted her up. The girl clung to his arm, too weak to speak. He could have walked away and left her, but something inside him refused. She was not an enemy. She was only a child caught in a world of blood. He wrapped his arm around her and carried her through the smoke. Arrows flew past and soldiers charged in every direction, but Ethan moved as if none of it mattered. He ducked behind walls and ran through alleys, his only thought to shield the girl. Twice he almost fell when the ground shook with blasts from siege fire, but he held her tight. She buried her face against his chest, trusting him even though she did not know his name. He reached the edge of the battlefield where the fighting was less fierce. Behind a broken cart, he found a space to hide her for a moment. She whispered a single word, calling for her mother. Ethan realized then who she was. She was not just any child. She was the daughter of the enemy queen. The same queen his leaders cursed in every speech, the same queen who ordered attacks on his people. Yet here was her daughter, small and trembling, and he had saved her. Ethan's heart pounded as he thought of what this meant. If his own men found out, they would call him a traitor. If the queen's soldiers saw him, they would strike him down. Yet when he looked at the girl, he felt no regret. She looked back at him with wide eyes, and in them he saw something he had not seen in a long time. It was innocence, untouched by the hatred that filled the world around them. He decided to keep moving. He carried her away from the heart of the battle until the noise grew distant. The girl grew tired and soon fell asleep in his arms. He watched her small hand clutch at his armor, and he swore to himself that he would not let her fall into harm again. For the first time since the war began, Ethan felt like he was fighting for something real. As night fell, he found shelter in the remains of an old barn. He laid her down on a bed of straw and covered her with his cloak. He sat nearby, sword ready, guarding her as she slept. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, or how the war would change because of this choice, but he knew one thing with certainty. He had saved the daughter of the queen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The queen stood on the high walls of her stronghold as the last fires of battle burned in the distance. She had been told that her daughter had vanished in the chaos. Her heart, though hardened by years of ruling and fighting, shook with fear. She sent her finest men to search, but none returned with good news. She was ready to believe her child was gone forever when word reached her of a strange tale. Whispers spread through the soldiers that a man from the enemy side had carried the young princess away from danger. At first, she did not believe it. She thought it was a trick, another lie made to weaken her. Yet the more she listened, the more she saw the fear in her men's eyes. They spoke of a soldier who had fought his way through fire, not to kill but to protect. The queen felt confusion rise inside her. She asked herself why an enemy would ever risk his life for her daughter. Such an act went against everything war had taught her. Meanwhile, Ethan kept the girl safe in the old barn. He watched over her until she woke at dawn. She looked at him with the same fear and trust as the night before. He gave her water and a small piece of bread from his pack. She ate quietly, glancing at him from time to time. Ethan did not speak much. He only told her she was safe with him. The girl whispered her name to him, Lily, and then asked if he would bring her to her mother. Ethan nodded, though he knew the danger of such a promise. Ethan carried Lily back toward the borders where her people guarded the land. Every step filled him with doubt. If his leaders saw him now, they would mark him as a traitor. If the queen's soldiers caught him, they would strike him down without mercy. But he kept walking because the thought of leaving the girl alone was worse than death. He had chosen his path and he would see it through. The queen finally ordered her soldiers to bring the enemy soldier to her alive. If they found him, she wanted answers for herself. Deep inside, she felt a strange pull, a question that would not leave her mind. Why did he do it? What kind of man would look at the daughter of his enemy and choose to save her? 2 days later, word reached her that the man had been seen near the river with a small child in his arms. The queen rode out with her guard to find him. The moment she saw Lily running toward her, safe and unharmed, her heart broke with relief. She leaped from her horse and held her daughter close. Then she looked up at Ethan. He stood still with his sword lowered, his face tired but steady. For a long moment they stared at each other. The queen expected to see hatred or fear in his eyes, but instead she saw calm and resolve. She wanted to ask him why he had done it, but the words caught in her throat. Her guards raised their blades, ready to cut him down. Lily pulled at her mother's hand and begged her not to let them hurt him. The queen raised her arm, stopping her men. She studied Ethan in silence, torn between duty and gratitude. He had crossed every line of war, and yet brought back the one soul she could not lose. That night, she summoned him in secret to her hall. He was brought in under guard, though she ordered them not to bind him. She dismissed her men until only the 3 of them remained. The queen sat with her daughter by her side, her eyes never leaving Ethan. The silence stretched before she finally spoke. She asked him the question that had haunted her since she first heard the tale. Why did you protect her? Ethan did not look away. He told her he could not stand by and watch an innocent child die, no matter whose blood she carried. The queen felt her chest tighten. For his words were simple, yet heavier than any speech she had heard in all her years of rule. The days after their first meeting passed with heavy tension. Ethan was allowed to leave the queen's hall, but not the stronghold. Her guards watched him closely, and every soldier looked at him with anger. They could not understand why their queen had spared him. Some whispered that he was a spy. Others said he had bewitched her. But the queen said nothing. She kept her silence and her daughter near her side. Only she and Lily knew the truth of what had happened on the battlefield. Ethan kept to himself, training in the yard and eating alone. Yet he noticed that the queen often came to watch him from the balcony above. Her eyes followed his every move. He could not tell if she watched out of distrust or something else. Each night he lay awake, wondering if she would call for his death the next day. But each morning he rose again, still alive, still under her roof. Lily broke the silence first. She sought Ethan out whenever she could. She asked him questions about his home, about the battles he had seen, about why he chose to save her. Ethan answered in short words, never seeking to impress her, but his honesty drew her close. Soon the queen began to notice. She saw her daughter smile in a way she had not smiled since before the war. For that alone, she let Ethan remain. One evening, the queen summoned Ethan again. They met in a small chamber lit by firelight. She dismissed her guards and sat across from him. Her voice was sharp when she asked him why he had not tried to flee. Ethan told her there was nowhere for him to run. His own people would call him a traitor, and her people would never accept him. The only choice he had was to stay and keep his honor. The queen studied his face and saw no fear. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her crown lighten. As weeks passed, their talks grew longer. At first they spoke of the war, of tactics and battles, of what each side had lost. Then the talk turned softer, about their lives before the fighting, about the families they had left behind. Ethan told her about the fields of his homeland, and how he had once dreamed of being a farmer instead of a soldier. The queen listened in silence, and when she finally spoke, she told him about the burden of ruling and the nights she cried alone for the men who died under her command. She had never spoken such words to any of her generals, yet with him the words came without force. Rumors spread in the stronghold. The soldiers saw the queen walk with the enemy soldier and their young princess between them. They whispered that he was no longer a prisoner, but something more. Many did not like it. Some even plotted to remove him, fearing his influence. But the queen silenced every voice with a single glance. No one dared defy her will when she made it clear that the man was under her protection. The bond between Ethan and the queen grew, though neither admitted it aloud. He began to see her not as the enemy ruler, but as a woman who carried pain equal to his own. She began to see him not as a soldier of the other side, but as a man who valued life above war. Their words carried weight, but their silences carried more. In those moments, something unspoken formed between them, fragile yet powerful. One night, as the wind howled outside the walls, the queen confessed that she no longer knew if she could go on with the war. She said her people expected her to crush her enemies, but in her heart she feared the cost had already grown too great. Ethan told her that wars end only when someone dares to step away from the fight. She looked at him in silence, knowing that his words planted a thought she could no longer ignore. It was then she realized he had become more than a protector of her daughter. He was now a voice she could not turn away from. The sound of war returned sooner than anyone expected. Enemy forces pushed closer to the stronghold, breaking through villages and burning the fields. The queen stood on her walls once more, her crown heavy on her head, her heart pulled between duty and the bond that had begun to grow inside her. The soldiers called for blood, but she thought of Ethan and his words. She thought of her daughter, who slept without fear only because of him. Ethan prepared himself to fight again. Though he had been treated as both guest and prisoner, he knew he could not stand aside if the battle reached the gates. When the attack came, he rushed into the fray with the queen's soldiers, blade in hand. Many stared in disbelief as he fought not against them but beside them. He shielded men who only days before had wished him dead. He struck down warriors from his own homeland, his face hard with resolve. Every strike tore at him inside, but he refused to let the stronghold fall. In the chaos, the queen's daughter Lily was swept into danger once more. A wall crumbled, and the girl screamed as flames rose around her. Ethan saw her and ran with no thought for his own life. He leaped through fire and falling stone to reach her. Lifting her into his arms, he shielded her with his body as the roof crashed down. When the dust cleared, he carried her out, coughing and burned, but alive. The queen herself had seen it all from the walls. She rushed to them, her soldiers partying as she came. When she took her daughter into her arms, she looked at Ethan with eyes that no longer held only suspicion. She saw the man who had twice saved what she held most dear. Gratitude struck her heart with a force she had not felt in years. The war roared on around them, yet in that moment, she thought only of him. That night, the stronghold held against the attack, but many lives were lost. Fires burned in the courtyards, and the wounded cried out in pain.
Ow.
The queen sat in her hall, her daughter asleep beside her, and she sent for Ethan. When he entered, his clothes still torn from battle, she rose to meet him. She told him she had seen his courage, and that she owed him more than she could ever repay. Ethan answered that he did only what he felt was right, nothing more. She stepped closer to him then, her voice low, her eyes steady. She said he was no longer her enemy. He had become something else, something she did not yet understand, but could not deny. Ethan stood still, his breath caught in his chest, for he felt the same. He had looked at her before as a queen, a ruler, an adversary. Now he saw her as a woman who carried strength and sorrow, a woman who had trusted him with her child. Outside the hall, whispers grew louder. Soldiers spoke of betrayal, of their queen's weakness, of the enemy soldier who now walked their halls with honor. Some wanted him gone, others wanted him dead. But the queen silenced them all with her command. She declared that no one would touch him, that his life was bound to hers by the bond he had forged in blood and fire. In the quiet that followed, Ethan and the queen spoke long into the night. They shared fears, dreams, and doubts, their words heavy with the weight of choice. Both knew the war would not pause for their hearts. Both knew danger lay ahead from enemies outside and from unrest within, yet neither could turn away now. She had seen him risk all for her daughter. He had seen her courage in choosing mercy over vengeance. The line between them had been broken, and in its place, something new had begun to grow. Fragile, but stronger with every passing day. The war reached its breaking point. Armies gathered on both sides, each ready for one final strike that would decide the fate of the land. The queen stood before her people, her face strong but her heart in conflict. She knew they looked to her for victory, but her thoughts turned again and again to Ethan. He had stood by her side when no one else dared. He had saved her daughter, fought for her stronghold, and broken the walls that years of hatred had built. She could not imagine sending him away, yet she knew the world would not forgive them easily. Ethan prepared himself for the last battle. He sharpened his sword in silence, his mind heavy with the choice that awaited him. He thought of his homeland and the men he had once fought beside. He thought of the queen and Lily, who now felt closer than family. He could not be both soldier and traitor. He could not belong to both sides. Yet his heart told him where he must stand. When the enemy advanced, the stronghold shook with the clash of steel. Flames rose into the night sky. The queen rode out with her banner, her guards around her, and Ethan at her side. Her soldiers at first grumbled, but when they saw him fight with all his strength, striking down wave after wave, their doubt faded into silence. He fought as if the land itself depended on him, not for a crown or a nation, but for the woman and the child who had given him a reason beyond war. The enemy pressed hard, but Ethan's courage spread like fire. Men who once cursed his name now followed his lead. The queen fought as well, her blade flashing as she commanded her people with fearless will. Side by side, she and Ethan turned the tide of battle. Though blood stained the ground and smoke filled the air, they stood together, unbroken. When dawn came, the enemy line broke. The battlefield fell silent, except for the groans of the wounded and the cries of the living. The queen's banner still waved above the stronghold. Victory was hers, but she felt no triumph. Instead, she looked to Ethan, weary and bloodied, standing at her side. She knew what she wanted, but also what it meant. To keep him was to defy every law of war. To release him was to tear apart the bond they had forged. That night, after the fires were put out and the dead were laid to rest, the queen called Ethan to her chamber. Lily sat nearby, her eyes filled with hope and fear. The queen spoke plainly. She told Ethan that he had given her more than victory, had given her trust, courage, and the chance to see beyond hatred. She said she could not let him go. Not as a ruler, but as a woman who could no longer imagine life without him. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He thought of the oath he had once sworn to his homeland. He thought of the men who would never forgive him. But then he thought of Lily's smile in the queen's eyes, and he knew his choice was already made. He swore that he would stay, not as a prisoner, not as an enemy, but as a protector of their future. The queen stepped closer, her hand trembling as she touched his. She whispered that their world would judge them, but she no longer cared. What mattered was that he had saved her daughter, and in doing so, had saved her as well. Together they would face whatever storms came. Together they would build something new from the ashes of war. And so the story of a soldier and a queen began not with conquest, but with a choice. A choice to protect, to trust, and to love, even when the world demanded otherwise. In that choice lay the true victory, one no sword could ever win.